Marcus Agrippa Luci filius consul tertium fecit. In this inscription on the Pantheon, we see two Praenomina, both Marcus and Lucius, but they're only abbreviated with one letter. Today we're going to talk about the Praenomina, the first names of the ancient Romans. I'm Luke, and this is polýMATHY.
Great names, like Marcus Agrippa, adorn this beautiful architectural masterpiece. But what was the name of the architect, or the name of the sculptor, who made this famous portrait of Augustus? While many of these names have been lost to time, great artists of the past several centuries, like Michelangelo, Picasso, Monet, resound through the ages due to the magnificence of their creations. And this beauty has endowed these works with tremendous value. However, because of their enormous value, these works can't be bought or traded by just anybody, until now. Masterworks, who has kindly sponsored this video, gives you the ability to invest in this hitherto inaccessible market. Masterworks has emerged as the only platform that takes billionaire art collectors head-on, allowing you to access their exclusive investments. And now you can invest in the very same art they do, names like Banksy, Monet, Basquiat, and other iconic artists for just a fraction of what they pay to purchase. And they do it because contemporary art prices outpaced the S&P 500 total return by 164% from 1995 to 2021, according to publicly available data. The total wealth held in art is estimated to be 1.7 trillion, and Deloitte projects it to grow by 900 billion by the year 2026. And with the stock market being so crazy lately, you're going to need to diversify your portfolio right away. Getting started with Masterworks is very easy. It takes just a few clicks. Visit their website, create an account, browse their artwork, and you can diversify your portfolio with one of the most stable assets around. If you don't want to wait until they find a buyer, Masterworks also offers a secondary market on their website, where you can sell your shares to another member, similar to how you would sell stock on an app like Robinhood. Normally there is a waitlist to invest in fine art, but you can skip the waitlist and start diversifying your portfolio today with Masterworks, the only investments platform dedicated to art investing, at the link in the description. The Latin word for name is nomen. It's a neuter noun, and that means that the nominative and the accusative forms are always going to be the same. Genitive nominis, of the name, nomini is the dative case, it means to or for the name, and the ablative is nomine. This is actually a really useful expression you can pick up right now. To say nomine means by the name of. For example, cantatorem cognomen nomine Paul McCartney. I know a singer by the name or by the name of Paul McCartney. And that's because a noun in the ablative case expresses by means of that noun. So nomine means by means of that noun, by means of the name. And it's a very useful expression that you need to know to learn Latin. For more on this, see my video, Latin by the Ranieri Dowling Method. You've probably seen ancient Roman names in textbooks, and they might not always conform to what we think of as the normal given name and surname. And we see Caesar, we see Julius Caesar, or Gaius Julius Caesar. Well, how many names would an ancient Roman actually have?
The ancient Romans would usually have three names: the Tria Nōmina, the praenomen, which is kind of like a first name, the nomen, which is kind of like a name, maybe a last name, and the cognomen, which is a little bit like a nickname. We're going to talk about this in some detail. First, we have the nomen. This is also known as the gens, or the familia, the actual tribe, the family that a person would belong to. Let's take, for example, Marcus Tullius Cicero. So his nomen, his tribe name, was Tullius, and his cognomen was Cicero, which means a big chickpea. Cicer is a chickpea, and a Cicero is a big one. Now, he seems to have inherited that cognomen probably from his father. Now, these family names like Tullius, they belong not just to him and his father and other members of the immediate family, but to a larger family group, and that's the idea of the tribe, of this Tullius. And the cognomen, though, served a little bit more like what we would think of as a last name or a surname. Then we have this Marcus, this praenomen that comes before it.
Here's a fun fact. Cicero, in English, was actually known as Tully for a very long time, based on his nomen, Tullius. Now, however, We prefer to call him Cicero for simplicity.
Now, praenomen, prae means in front of as a preposition, and nomen is a name, a pre-name. It sounds like first name. It sounds like a given name. And we think of given names as being reasonably unique. We know other people named Luke or Mark or John, but in general, there's a lot of variety of first names in most of our languages, so we don't have to worry too much about, oh, we find another Luke or another John or whoever. That happens, but not that often. But with the praenomina in Latin, it happened 1 in every 10 people, essentially, because there were only about 10 or 12, at most about 18 of these praenomina that were commonly used. And some of them are like Marcus and Lucius, like we see here. But what happened is traditionally, these names are used in the family, and then they would name a child after an uncle or a grandfather. It was actually something that still happens here in Italy quite a lot. And so a confusion would start to happen where just that first name, like Marcus or Lucius, wasn't really helpful to individuate that person. That would be because there would be so many other people around. If you were to cry Luci in a piazza like this in ancient times, you would have probably 20 different men look at you and say, oh, were you talking to me? Because it wouldn't be nearly specific enough. So that's a significant problem, right? And that's why having these Tria Nōmina becomes more important to identifying individuals. In fact, the praenomen was something that was more associated with children, with young boys in particular, because as a young boy would become older, they would tend to use their nomen and their cognomen more frequently. And that's one reason we think of Gaius Julius Caesar as Caesar's Caesar, because that name helps to really clarify who we're talking about a lot more than simply Julius. There were so many people named Julius, whereas Gaius was a very common praenomen, and a lot of people had that. So if someone like Gaius Julius Caesar had a lot of brothers, each one would probably have a different praenomen, and usually you don't have more than 10 or 12 children in a family, so that would be enough to clarify which of the sons are being referred to. But otherwise, they all essentially had the same name, and that praenomen was really barely used.
So the occasions in which we can actually imagine ancient Romans using a praenomen with someone they know are with children, that is, with young boys, and also between siblings or close intimate relations. Here we see a letter from Marcus Tullius Cicero, from Marcus Tullius Cicero, to his brother Quintus Tullius Cicero, who actually served with Caesar in the Gallic Wars, which is kind of interesting. And we see at the top, this is the normal way to address a letter in Latin, Marcus Quinto Fratri Salute. Salute is abbreviated. There are a lot of standard abbreviations in Latin. Literally, Marcus to Quintus, to the brother, health, which of course is where we get salutations. Marcus Quinto Fratri Salutem. Marcus to his brother Quintus, greetings. Here is a list of some of the most common praenomina, and notice how they have standard abbreviations. I already talked about Gaius and Gnaeus, and why they have the letter C as part of their abbreviation and not the letter G, so please see those videos to learn more. This is the inscription on the Pantheon that you've seen behind me in this video, and this is how we would write it with normal standard modern Latin writing conventions. Marcus Agrippa, Luci filius consul, tertium fecit. And here it is without the standard abbreviations of those two praenomina. And we see that Marcus is in the nominative case. Marcus Agrippa, this is the subject of this sentence. Marcus Agrippa tertium fecit. Marcus Agrippa made for the third time. Well, what did he make? Well, he made this Pantheon. That's what it's talking about. And then we have this other information about him. Marcus Agrippa Luci filius. So Marcus Agrippa, the son of Lucius. Lucius who? Lucius Agrippa. So that's who. Note the really interesting thing that the praenomen, when it's abbreviated, it doesn't show the grammatical case. We determine the grammatical case based on the name, the nomen, or perhaps even the cognomen that is written out next to it. So that's how we know that it's Marcus Agrippa and not Marco Agrippa or Marci Agrippa or something like that. And we know from the traditional abbreviation that the F stands for filius, the son, and this is in nominative case, along with the Marcus Agrippa, Luci filius, so the son of Lucius, of Lucius, or Lucius. And the other word here is consul, consul. Well, this is also nominative case, so literally, something like Consul Marcus Agrippa, son of Lucius, made for the third time. Or we could also say Marcus Agrippa, son of Lucius, made for the third time when he was consul. That's the idea here. So as we can see, the praenomina are used to individuate members of the same family, whether brothers or fathers and sons, and usually for men and boys. In a book like Familia Romana, we see that the two boys are identified by their praenomina, Marcus, Quintus, but Julia, she's identified by just the female version of the nomen. But in reality, Marcus and Quintus are actually Marcus Julius Balbus and Quintus Julius Balbus, just as Julius is in fact Gaius Julius Balbus, and he just doesn't really use conventionally his praenomen very much anymore as an adult, except in some kind of formal documentation.
So for this reason, the praenomina weren't really as useful as first names are in, say, English, to figure out, all right, this is that person or that person. What about women, though? Because we really only talked about the male Tria Nōmina. Well, in reality, these praenomina aren't particularly useful even to separate individual men. In reality, it's almost as if everybody sort of has the same relatively small group of names, this gens, this nomen, these cognomina, which aren't even separating the father from the son. And the situation is essentially the same for women. Depending on the century for Latin and for the ancient Romans, some women would actually have praenomina, but they weren't used very often. Historically, we tend to see a lot of male names for the reasons that we have an ancient Rome that has men a lot in the political arena, and that's one of the reasons we see them. We do see more female praenomina in imperial times, though.
From the early to mid-Republic, in fact, there were many women who had praenomina. It was the norm for both men and women to have praenomina, and they could be abbreviated just with a single letter, as we saw before, and sometimes also, depending on how common it was for a praenomen to exist in that time period, the praenomen could be written out in its entirety. Like we said before, the reason that the praenomina seem to fall out of use is because there are other ways that the Romans would prefer to designate their daughters, with major, minor, or even maxima for the eldest, or diminutive suffixes like Julia or Juliola for little Julia. Women by convention will not change their name, however, when marrying. That means the name that they get at birth, Julia, they keep that for their entire life. If a family had a lot of daughters, then we get something that is essentially a cognomen, Julia Maxima, Julia Secunda, Julia Tertia, and this functions very much like the praenomina functioned once upon a time in an earlier form of Roman society. That is, by literally counting the children. We saw that the praenomina for men, there are names like Quintus, the fifth, and Sextus, the sixth, Septimus, the seventh, Octavus, the eighth. And what we might say this points out to us is that the praenomina of traditional male use and these cognomina that we add to separate daughters, that's really all they do. Their purpose is to separate the different sons from one another and to separate the daughters so one knows about whom one is talking, and that's their main purpose. And they don't necessarily carry the same kind of weight that an individual, what we might call a Christian name or a given name, has in, say, the tradition of Western European society. And as we move into the empire, we see that there's a tradition of actually placing a female nickname or cognomen, a kind of traditional name or sometimes individual name that doesn't have an antecedent, in front of the nomen. And as we see here with these kinds of secunda and tertia, putting those number-based praenomina actually after. So having that inverted convention is something that happens, which I find to be just really fascinating.
Thank you so much for watching and subscribing. From the Pantheon in Rome, Valete. So because of this, the praenomina weren't really useful to figuring out if... so because of this, so for this reason, the praenomina weren't really that useful to... and